everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm very pleased to be back with yet another Exo-6 Star Trek action figure 1/6 scale review. And no, this is not a new release, this is a little bit belated because this figure, 7 of 9, actually came out last year. Now I initially passed on this figure because at the time I was really struggling for cash and I had to be very choosy about which figures I picked up. Although I did go backwards and forwards whether I would invest in this character because although I'm not a huge fan of Voyager, I did really like 7 of 9, I did like those Borg episodes, so I have affection for this character when I was growing up. However, things have changed. I was fortunate enough to be able to find this on the secondary market and I finally invested in this figure. So I'm very glad to be able to finally share my thoughts with you on this figure and give you my review. So as ever, let's start off by taking a look at the packaging. Now this is going to be quite familiar for anyone who's seen any of the other Exo-6 figure review videos in the past because it is fitting that same sort of layout and design, but it's a really good design, so I'm going to talk about it a little bit more depth. So first of all, we have this striking glossy image of the action figure itself up front and centre, this very nice portrait which looks really colourful, looks really nice, it's very eye-catching, which is great, contrasting very nicely against the very bland black background, but it works really well. Where we have the lettering of the Star Trek logo and the insignia and the name of the character, this is all in embossed foil, which looks really nice, catches the light beautifully and looks really good. So up front and centre, this outer packaging looks great. Now when we flip the packaging and look at the side panel, we can see in the top right hand corner there that we have this wraparound image featuring all of the various Voyager cast. Now this is a beautiful illustrated image. This is consistent with the other figures in the line, where each era, each series has its own sort of mural created, and I think they do a fantastic job with the artwork on these. It's consistent but very nicely rendered. I think they've done a really nice job with this, and I can't say enough good things about it. Now, if we flip the packaging and look at the reverse, we can see a full scale image of the figure itself and all the various bits and pieces it comes with. Now this is a little bit more lacklustre, it's a bit more text heavy and it's a bit more bland because it is mostly just black void packaging in the background, but it's still fairly presentable. But really it's all about the front and the side panel for this figure. Now the outer casing is just a slipcase, so this just slides up, and if we take a look underneath we can see the figure in this wonderful window packaging here where we can see the figure and all of its various different accessories. There's nothing really going on around this packaging, there's nothing really on the side panels or the back of this box. Now this represents the first female character I've had in the Exo-6 1/6 scale line, and I have to admit I was actually quite surprised by this figure because it utilises a brand new body type which consists of a rubber undercoating. So this figure actually has the strange texture that is more familiar with a bendy figure. That's the only way I could describe it. So it feels very padded and it's very weird and unusual. But first, let's take a look at this head sculpt. Now, interestingly, at first glance, I think this is actually a really good likeness of the actor Jerry Ryan. I think there's a really clear resemblance here, and I think the features are quite sharp, particularly around the eyes and the nose, and yet somehow when I compare it against this image, I'm not quite sure. There seems to be something ever so slightly off, and I can't put my finger on it because all the dimensions look to be pretty accurate. And as I said, when it's standing on my shelf, I can't find any fault with it, and yet when I compare it against the image here, it doesn't quite match up, and I'm not quite sure what it is. So there's something ever so slightly off here, but all in all, this is a pretty solid sculpt. I think they've done a nice job with the dimensions, and if we look at the paint apps, particularly on the Borg eyebrow, for lack of a better term, that implant there, I really love this. I think the sculpting's really nice, but also the fine detail there. There's actually a number of different paint washes and different paints being used. There's a little bit of gold, a little bit of silver, a little bit of black running through it, giving it a lot of depth and texture, which looks absolutely fantastic. Likewise on the cheek as well, I think it looks really good. Now the hair, I've got some mixed feelings on. I think it's sculpted quite nicely, I think it works, I think the dimensions are accurate, but the choice of actually using a gold paint here rather than yellow, I'm not sure. Having the dark wash running through it definitely works, but this is very similar to the approach they took to the Admiral Kirk figure from the motion picture, and it just looks a little bit weird because they've gone for this gold paint effect which isn't quite natural looking. So I don't know, I've got mixed feelings on this. It certainly looks fine on the shelf, but up close it's noticeable and it's a bit unusual. Now, if we look at the side profile of this figure, then I'm not quite into this. I have to say this looks very odd from the side. These dimensions do not look right at all. This looks very strange to me. I don't know if I'm the only one, but this doesn't look quite right. But certainly head forward straight on, it looks really good. Now, I've come to really love the tailoring and the costuming of the Exo-6 Star Trek figures. They're absolutely outstanding, and 7 of 9 is no exception. I'm very impressed with the material they've used for this costume. It seems very authentic without actually having touched the real costume, but it looks very screen accurate to what we see on screen. The dimensions look perfect, and what's interesting is that this is obviously a catsuit. It's very tight fitting and it's going over that rubber body, but it works exceptionally well. There's no bulges, there's nothing that looks unusual out of place. This all looks incredibly well done. The whole figure is sewn into this costume, so there's no seams, there's no zips, there's no way of really getting this off, and I'm not quite sure how they've managed to get it so perfectly in place without it looking strange. I think they've done a fantastic job. I don't know how they've done it, but yeah, top notch. I also really like how they've managed to get the ridges around the waist there. Those, I'm guessing, from the Borg implants. I'm not quite sure, to be honest, but she definitely has ridges around the waist, and that's really interesting how they've managed to capture that look and feel as well. Again, without it looking strange or out of proportion, it all looks spot on. Another beautiful little piece here is the comm badge. I love how this is a separate piece. This is sewn into the costume, and it looks just like it does in the show. Actually, it's a plastic piece, but it looks like it's metal. Again, very finely painted, and it just looks absolutely spot on. The dimensions, the proportions, brilliant, and it's so good. It's so well done. I have to give them top marks for this. The hands are also very nicely rendered, particularly the Borg hand. I really like this. I love the detailing. I love the paint taps there of that silver paint with that metallic paint, which is, catches the light really nicely. And I love how accurate this is. And of course, it does flip both sides as well. So if we flip that over and look at the palm, we can see the detailing there as well. Obviously, it looks very, very accurate to what we see on screen. And I think they've done a really nice job showing attention and care to detail here. And as bizarre as it sounds, I'm actually quite impressed with the heels on this figure as well, because as I said, this is all sewn in, it's all one piece. I can't really see any seams, so I'm not entirely sure how they've managed to pull this off, but the figure is all sewn in, and you can actually see the heels, the plastic piece there actually sort of glued onto the bottom there, so it's all absolutely seamless, and it looks fantastic. Okay, so let's take a look at the articulation. Now, Exo-6 do warn that this figure has more limited articulation due to the body sculpt. So it does have a ball joint at the top of the neck there, allowing the head to move from side to side, as you would hope. It will also lean left and right, thanks to the articulation in the neck, which is hidden by this rubber neck, which is strange and unusual. And it does feel quite resistant, and I'm a little bit nervous about bending it forwards and backwards and side to side. If you persevere, it will hold a lot of positions, but at the same time, there is that slightly queasy feeling of, am I about to snap this or tear this? So I do recommend caution and not pushing it too far. Now, the shoulders are weird. They do seem to actually sort of dislocate in some places, but they do allow plenty of movement. The arms will lift up and out, and as I said, you can actually get some interesting poses with this figure, but again, there is that same queasy feeling of, am I about to snap the shoulder here? So, as ever, I do recommend caution with this. Now, again, the arm does bend to 90 degrees. In fact, it will go back a little bit further, but you are pushing against the rubber here, and it does feel weird when you're kind of clicking it back in place. In fact, it reminds me of the old action men of the 90s, where they had rubber arms and rubber legs and there was no clear joint to move forwards and backwards. Now, there is a pin swivel at the wrist, of course, so the hand will rotate all the way around. It will also hinge forwards and backwards, which is absolutely fantastic. There is articulation in the waist that does allow the figure to move from side to side and lean left and right. Again, all of this is very difficult to gauge because of the rubber suit underneath and how tight that costume is, and you're always left with that feeling of, is this safe? But you are able to move it in these different ways. Likewise, you can bend the figure forwards and backwards, and you'll notice that at the top of the torso, there's actually quite a lot of give here, especially when it comes to leaning back. There's almost like a separate piece here to accommodate this. So you can be slightly more confident with this, but as ever, do be gentle. There is a ball joint in the hips, allowing the legs to hinge out to the side. This moves fairly freely and easily. There's not much resistance here, which is really encouraging. There does seem to be some articulation at the top of this hip that will allow the leg to move from side to side, but there is a bit more resistance here, so be careful. Now the legs will easily kick forwards, which is great. They'll go back a little bit, and then at the knee we have the same as we do with the arms, where there's this rubber joint here, and you can get it to 90 degrees easily, but I wouldn't push it beyond that. There is a hinge at the ankle, allowing that foot to kick forwards and backwards easily enough. Now, to the credit, Exo-6 have been incredibly generous when it comes to the accessories for 7 of 9. In fact, they've given her some of the most out of any of the figures they've released so far. She comes with an additional 4 pairs of hands, including a very cool Borg hand with the actual assimilation tubes coming out, which is a very nice touch. But that's not all, because she also comes with a phaser and pouch, as well as a tricorder and pouch, and a data pad. Not forgetting, she also has a magnetic belt for those pouches to attach to, and even a phaser rifle. She also comes with the standard Starfleet base, the transporter base. If you've seen any of my other reviews, you know I'm kind of getting sick of seeing the same base replicated each time. I don't mind so much with the Starfleet characters, it does kind of make sense, and of course they do connect together. But it would have been nice if we'd actually had, you know, something Borg specific, and, you know, in a perfect world, maybe she would even come with that Borg alcove rather than have to fork out for another £200. As ever, the fine detailing on these accessories are really fun. I really like how the datapad actually has an image of a Borg cube on there in particular. This looks great. And of course, we have the tricorder as well. And I love this because obviously you can fold it up in its folded form, which is fantastic. And there's some nice buttons and different colours on here, which is great. But you can also open this up and you will see that it's held together with a series of magnets, so you can have 2 looks for it, which I think is fantastic. And then inside we have some of those specific stickers, which just look absolutely fantastic. We saw this with the QMX Picard previously, but this is a really, really cool touch, and I love this. I think this works tremendously well. I was a little bit hesitant about the belt at first. It really struggled to get around her waist. I thought, oh no, this actually won't connect into place. It's actually just held together by 2 plastic pegs. But to be fair, once it's in, it does seem to be very secure and neat. Although, to be honest, I won't be undoing it once it's on. It's staying on, because I did have the feeling that it wouldn't quite meet there, and it did feel like there's a lot of resistance. But as I said, once it's in, it's nice and snug, and yeah, it definitely looks the part. Now, the best part, of course, is actually adding the various pouches. You can see the magnets on the back there, and they will hook into certain places on the belt. Now sadly, the whole belt is not magnetic, as I'd previously thought. It is actually just selected parts where the magnet will meet, so it will only go into selected areas. And the various accessories fit in snugly and securely without much resistance, which is great, and there's definitely little clips as well to secure that phaser to make sure it doesn't fall out, and it looks pretty cool, I have to say. It looks very neat and professional. Now, with the wide array of different hands she has, I'm pleased to say she doesn't struggle to hold most of her accessories. Even the data pad, which is very thin, fits nice and snugly into her grip, and it looks pretty cool. Likewise, no issues holding the phaser in the same hand, no less, as well. This is a nice snug grip, and the proportions look pitch perfect. However, I did notice with the tricorder, whilst there's no issues gripping this and keeping this in place, it does rely much more on gravity, and it doesn't feel like it's a very tight, snug grip. Maybe I'm using the wrong hand, but it's the only one that seems quite wide enough to hold it, but I feel like it's almost a little bit too wide. But as I said, it definitely doesn't have any problems actually keeping this in place. It hasn't fallen out of a grip so far, so it must be doing something right. Also, I want to say kudos to Exo-6 for including the assimilation hand. This is not something I would have thought to include, but it's a very nice touch, and it is such a character-specific piece, so I think they've done a good job with this. I'm a little bit nervous about displaying it with this hand because those 2 spikes do seem very brittle. They are just loose plastic, so I do feel like they could snap very easily, but as long as you're careful, this looks great. Now, I have to be honest, the accessory I'm most excited by is the phaser rifle. I think this is a really cool addition, and I think it's pretty interesting. So I think this. Now, I have to be honest, the accessory I was most excited by was the phaser rifle. This is a really cool, larger-than-life accessory, and I think it looks really cool. There's a nice attention to detail, as you'd expect, and it looks great. I particularly like that it actually has the shoulder strap as well, and we can see that Seven's definitely giving off Ripley vibes here. So I think this looks very cool. Now, I must admit, I did struggle a little bit knowing which hands to use with this. I think I figured it out correctly, but it doesn't look quite right. I've definitely seen some really fantastic promotional images out there where this looks a lot more snug, a lot better than how I've got it. But nevertheless, this still looks really impressive, and I think you can get the figure into some pretty cool stances with it. That makes it really fun to put on display. So overall then, I have to say I really like this figure. I think they've done a tremendous job of that. I'm super impressed with the tailoring, the accessories, and for the most part I think the likeness is pretty sharp as well. Now the rubber body I've got mixed feelings on. I think it definitely does feel unique to this character, which is great, so I think it definitely works in that area. I'm a little bit more hesitant with it though. I don't quite trust the articulation. I feel like I'm constantly going to break it or something's not quite right, which I don't like that feeling. I feel like I could probably get a little bit more out of it than I currently am. But that being said, this is a really nice figure to put on display. It's a very worthwhile addition to the collection. Whether you're a Voyager fan or just a Star Trek fan in general, Seven of Nine is such an iconic character that I think it definitely brightens up the collection. She's very colourful and definitely very fun with some of these accessories. So definitely want to go ahead with if you're in two minds. But all in all, I have to say I'm really happy with this purchase. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.